As the hills of West Virginia resound with the sound of Golden Blue football.
Almost heaven, West Virginia.
Now let's bring on the Mountaineers. Goes around about the 50 to 10 to 5. A touchdown, West Virginia. He did it.
He did it. Patrick White. Touchdown, Tay Von Austin.
But Don Nehlen's Mountaineers enjoy walking in where angels fear to tread.
I think you think that these guys are going to fall over dead for you. Well, I got news for you. They're going to punch you right in the mouth. It's Mountaineer pride!
Nothing cheap, nothing dirty, but West Virginia football. West Virginia football.
We've no doubt tonight they shouldn't have played the old Golden Blue. Not this night!
They've done it. They've done it. A perfect season. And the Mountaineers, for the first time in history, undefeated and untied.
Don Nehlen and his Mountaineers, for the second time, have finished a regular season with an unblemished mark.
Ain't no stopping the Golden Blue.
It is a great night to be a Mountaineer wherever you may be.
What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into another live stream here on the Country Roads webcast channel, coming at you for another transfer portal update here on December 27th. Figured I'd go ahead and do it as a live stream so I can get it out to you guys. I got to head to work here in a bit, so I won't be with you guys too long, but did want to come out and talk about this one, give you guys the latest on the transfer portal news, as West Virginia has had another departure from an offensive lineman leaving. A lot of speculation. Could he potentially be following Matt Moore to Virginia Tech as well, like we saw Thomas Remack do? Like there's speculation that others in the portal could potentially do. We'll see what happens. But West Virginia has lost another player that has entered the portal here, and so we wanted to update that. And then, of course, that leads me to talk about the roster again a little bit. I want to show you guys kind of what we have left and talk about some of the pieces that may fill in there with the transfer commits that we have, the incoming freshmen that we have. Just talk a little bit about the roster as it stands currently. As West Virginia will look to add a ton of pieces. We'll continue to update this roster throughout the offseason. The roster update videos will start, of course, once the new year comes around in January. I'll start doing the roster updates like I've been doing for these transfer portal update as players actually enroll and get on campus. I'll start doing those officially, but I do want to update the roster now that we've lost Kyle Altuner to the transfer portal, unfortunately, which is another loss from the offensive line department, which West Virginia has suffered many of, and the offensive line is pretty barren, which is what was leading to the roster update. But this was the official news that came out today in regards to this. Kind of surprising. I thought we were maybe out of the woods in this transfer portal window of guys entering, but just before that window closes here in a bit, Kyle Altuner decides to hit as well. Enter the portal here as reported by Matt Zenitz, CBS Sports 247. Four-star true freshman offensive lineman Kyle Altuner has entered the portal. And I know some people have said, hey, maybe this isn't such a big loss because he's never played a down yet. But, you can never really discount potential, right? That's such a big factor. And he's the guy that I've raved about in the past. I think if he wouldn't have got injured, he probably would have played some last season, even as a true freshman. Extremely high rated in the class. His film is awesome. And then also, not only high rated in the class, but as far as offensive lineman recruits in WVU football history, I think he's pretty high up there as well as far as that is concerned. So, he was one with a lot of potential. We were excited to see. I think he could have had a chance to battle for that starting center position at WVU this year with Landon Livingston. We'll see what happens there now. But so we got Kyle Altuner hitting the portal, which leads me to pull up our transfer portal tracker just to show you guys the full list one more time before we talk a bit about the roster, and encourage you guys as we talk about this, go ahead, throw your questions, comments in the chat. I will try and catch up with you guys in the chat here before we wrap up the stream. And if you are watching this live or in a playback, just be sure to take a second, just scroll over there, hit that thumbs up button. That really helps us a ton with the YouTube algorithm, helps us find more Mountaineer football fans like yourself. And if you are one of those that wants to follow the roster construction of the 2025 Mountaineers, know who's going to be out there for you when August rolls around. Be sure to subscribe here to the channel. We'll be covering it all along, from transfer portal updates to roster updates like this one. Kyle Altuner, the latest entries. You see the list there of transfers out for WVU. Wanted to share that here, and we'll go back to that list momentarily. But first, let's pull up the roster to do this roster update now that we know that Kyle Altuner most likely not going to be on the team. We're going to go ahead and remove him from the roster here, like we have the other players that are currently in the portal, whether they're uncommitted or have committed elsewhere already. So let's go ahead and pull this up. You guys will see this list more often. Like I said, once January rolls around and we get into the roster update videos, and we'll talk a little bit about this roster piece by piece momentarily, but want to come down here, take Kyle Altuner's name off the list, and you see the offensive line a little barren now. You're really young and inexperienced. You got some guys that I'm excited about. Xavier Bosley, I think, has a lot of potential for one that really stands out to me. Landon Livingston looked good when we saw him at times this season. So you do have some guys left over there, and we'll talk more about that when we get to it. But let's do this position by position. Let's get into the roster update section of this really quickly. Because at quarterback, obviously not a ton returning. Nico Marchiol is basically the only experience that you have there currently. He'll be a redshirt junior. And then you'll have Khalil Wilkins, who's a redshirt freshman, who you guys know I'm super excited about. I think he's a really good fit in the Rich Rod offense. He's maybe tailor-made for that type of offense. You know, a left-handed, fast quarterback that's a redshirt freshman in a Rich Rod offense. Where have you heard that before, right? So you have those two as scholarship players, which obviously shows you're going to bring someone else in. You do have a true freshman coming in, which let's go ahead and pull up our signings list. So we can talk about the freshmen here as we go through each position. We do have a quarterback that will be coming in as a true freshman. And that, of course, will be Scotty Fox. He'll be added to the roster out of Ohio, 6'2", 210. Dual threat guy, can run a little bit, so I think he will work in Rich Rod's offense. But I'm probably, not going to get a ton of experience for him this year, say for, reps, in practice that you can get him, in scrimmages that you can get him, and maybe you get him into a garbage time game against Robert Morris or something if you're lucky. But most likely he's going to redshirt, not see a ton of action. So you see the need to bring in another quarterback from the transfer portal. West Virginia hasn't done that yet, but they are, of course, targeting some. More on that in a bit. That's what I want to talk about after I wrap up the roster update, is talk a bit about some targets in the portal, and I want to talk a little bit about my favorite target, my highest ranking target in the portal that I really want to go after at the quarterback position, which you guys have heard me rave about before, but more on that momentarily. Let's continue to go through the roster here. So that's what we're looking at quarterback. Obviously, probably need to add another transfer in there to compete with, a redshirt freshman, a true freshman, and then only one experienced guy on the roster. So offense, I think we have one potential starter returning. I think that's only Jaheim White. Gallagher, you could maybe count. He started towards the end of the season, so maybe you could say two on offense. So that's one reason I wanted to go over this roster update with you guys, because it's pretty much going to be a whole new look next season. So that's why these roster updates are going to be prevalent throughout the off season. But as we look at the running back position, Jaheim White staying home is so huge for West Virginia right now, and I think it's so huge for him also. Rich Rod's scheme, he could be absolutely dominant in. We've seen Rich Rod find all kinds of running backs that have gone on to be stars at different places. You look just last season at Jack State, brings in a guy from Limestone University, obviously not very highly recruited, in Trey Stewart was his name, runs for 1,600 yards, over 1,600 yards and 23 touchdowns on the season. So Jaheim White, I think, can really be lethal in the Rich Rod offense. And I think some of the other running backs we have could be good in as well. You have Dewar Hubbard and Trayvon Dunbar, who will be redshirt freshmen, returning like both of those guys. You have, some walk-ons still on the roster if they choose to remain. We'll see what happens now with revenue sharing and the roster cap stuff starting in 2025. But you still do have Clay Ash and Judah Price as preferred walk-ons on the roster. You guys know in my roster trackers, transfer portal trackers, I really only use the scholarship players just to make it more brief and easy to keep up with. So that's where we're standing there. And then as far as players coming in at that position, we do not have any running backs that we've brought in the transfer portal yet, so I don't want to pull that up, but we can pull up the signings list, because there is one that I'm really excited about, actually, and that's DeAndre Desenor, who will be joining the roster in the future. Fingers crossed, out of Florida. Super fast guy, quick twitch. I think he'll fit great in the Rich Rod system as well. So there's a running back position. Let's go ahead and keep moving here through this roster update. I'll go through the offense. I'll come back, touch up with you guys in the chat a little bit before we talk about the defensive update now. After we're covered the transfer portal side as far as the departure, we're doing the roster update now after we removed Kyle Altuner off the roster. And then we're going to talk some transfer portal targets before we wrap up as well. But we'll go through the offense. I'll hit up on some of y'all's comments before we get to that. The wide receiver, where West Virginia has lost a lot, yet again, it's going to be an inexperienced position for the most part, as far as experience, I guess, playing at WVU really for a lot of these guys. But you're probably going to bring in some transfers. They're going to help here. You already have a couple. We'll talk about those momentarily. But guys, you have returning thus far, Jaden Bray will be back for his final season of college football. Jarrell Williams, who played some in the bowl game, had a nice reception there, has been a mainstay on the roster for a while now. I still have him. Rodney Gallagher, like I said, one of the only other starters besides Jaheim White that could potentially return on offense. TJ Johnson, a legacy player. And funny enough, I believe his father actually played for Rich Rod in the first Rich Rod tenure. So there's another connection for you right there. Came in, was kind of a tweener. They didn't know if he was going to be tight end or receiver. I think he's more settled in at receiver now. We'll see how it works out moving forward. Brandon Raymond and Dom Collins both will be redshirt freshmen that I'm really excited about. Brandon Raymond is a super talented guy that has a lot of potential. And you guys know I've raved about Dom Collins a ton. Fastest player on the roster. And I think as far as a Rich Rod offense is concerned, watch out for him to really take a big step. His stock rose a lot now that this is a Rich Rod system. I think we could see more of Dom Collins next season. So that's who we have left. Let's talk about who we're bringing in. Let's go freshmen first, then we'll talk about the transfers that may be joining that receiver position as well. As far as the freshmen on the that we're bringing in that we have signed, we have a few here. We have Jaleel Hall, wide receiver from Pennsylvania. Great size, obviously coming in. Probably going to want to add a little bit more to the frame, but we'll see what they can do with him in winter conditioning. Maybe get a little bit on that frame, and maybe he'll be able to contribute early even with that 6'4" size. You got Jaleel Hall, who I think is a big addition. Then you have an in-state guy in Tyshawn Dews as well, who you're going to add to the roster, 5'11", 170, one of the top recruits in the state of West Virginia in this class. West Virginia able to secure him, bring him in. So you have those freshmen coming in here to join the roster. And then you already have, a transfer that you are adding at that position as well that is committed to the Mountaineers. We go here back to our transfer portal tracker and scroll down to our transfers in, where we have obviously the most recent one we talked about, Gerard Bowie from Jack State, which is super interesting because he really had a big bowl game. Looks like he's finally going to reach his potential at this level. And I also found it interesting because down here from where I'm from in Mercer County, he played at Concord previously, funny enough. And then you have Orrin Singleton Jr., better known as Man Singleton, coming over from Eastern Michigan. And we saw some of his highlights when I talked about him on one of the more recent transfer portal updates. I think that was back on the 23rd. You guys can check that out on the channel under the transfer portal update playlist. But he's a pretty quick, shifty guy that I think is underrated. Maybe he could even be a return man type. So that's what you're looking at as far as receiver is concerned. Now we just have tight end and offensive line to talk about here, guys. And then we will catch up on the chat a little bit before we flip over and do the defensive roster update. So tight end, who's back? We have Greg Genross, who will be a redshirt senior. He was one of the highest rated JUCO players at the tight end position last year. Didn't get a chance to contribute, but still has one final year. 6'7", so great size. Could be a pass catching option. But I think Noah Braham and Jack Samarco are interesting in this Rich Rod scheme because they're probably more leaning to the blocking side being the strength of their game. We saw Jack Samarco do a lot of that as a true freshman. He did get a couple targets, but Noah Braham I think is interesting too because, his dad obviously was one of the greatest walk-ons ever at WVU as an offensive lineman. We know the blocking pedigree is there for Noah Braham. So I'll be interested to see how he fits in this Rich Rod scheme. Could he be the Owen Schmidt type? You never know. But Noah Braham, Jack Samarco, Greg Genross is who will be back. We'll see how Rich Rod decides to utilize those three. I'm really interested to see what he does with Genross because as far as tight ends in a Rich Rod system, from what I remember previously, didn't get a ton of targets really. They're mainly used, in blocking roles. And I feel like Braham and Samarco are more suited to that, but we'll see what happens. Maybe Greg Genross will stick around, see how he's utilized in the spring before he makes a decision on his future. So obviously probably need to add somebody at the tight end position. Well, Rich Rod was already on it. And another in-state native coming to join at that tight end position as far as a transfer is concerned. We can go back here to our transfer in list, and we see Jacob Barrick, who is from Martinsburg. Funny enough, same as Bowie, both from Martinsburg. So you lose a Martinsburg guy potentially in Hudson Clement, you bring in two in Bowie and Barrick. And Barrick has shown great ability to be a blocker there in the Jack State scheme as they dominated in the run game when he was a part of that a few times and did catch some passes there as well. So he does have that capability. He's really transformed his body, came in kind of undersized, and has really molded himself into a really good blocker. So I think he could be a contributor, a good addition to have there at the tight end position. And then we do have a freshman coming in that's going to help us there, maybe even early as a true freshman, because he has that great size that you like to see of a young tight end. And that is Jackson Aquarty from Wisconsin. Did you see 6'7", 230 already coming in? And to me, that's reminiscent when we're looking back in last year's recruiting class at Jack Samarco, who was 6'6", 235, 240 in that range. And he got to play early as a true freshman. So could the same happen for Aquarty? We'll see what happens. But I like the size West Virginia has at tight end. 6'7" for both Aquarty and Genross. And then Samarco's at least 6'6", so you still do have great size at the tight end position, despite losing a little bit there after Traylon Davis just choosing to medically retire, who I thought would have been really good in the Rich Rod scheme as a blocker, but chooses to, go another way. So that's what you have at the tight end. And then lastly, for the offensive side, before we flip it over here in a minute and talk about the defensive, we got to look at the offensive line, which is definitely, a big discussion point here as we're talking about Kyle Altuner leaving, who was a potential returnee here. West Virginia still without an offensive line coach. I think the sooner that we get one of those in, maybe the better, because we can maybe keep some of these other guys on the roster, keep them from transferring out. But tackles, for right now, I have Lucas Austin listed at left tackle. He'll be a redshirt freshman. Right tackle, I think Xavier Bosley is going to be entrenched as your starter, whether it's on that right side or whether they choose to shift him, we'll see. But I think Xavier Bosley is definitely one of the guys that's returning that will be a starter in this offensive line. Justin Terry is another guy that can play tackle. He'll be a redshirt freshman. A couple redshirt sophomores that the staff had mentioned being high on, I think could be in play at the guard position, Nick Cray and Cooper Young. And then we've seen Landon Livingston this year get some reps in place of Brandon Yates, and he looked good when we saw him. So I think he'll definitely factor into the battle at the center position and potentially maybe be the incumbent there to start at the center position for WVU in 2025. We'll see what happens. There will be some guys that will get into the mix there in that interior. None more so than a guy that we talked about in a recent transfer portal update, one of my favorite additions because of his name, his attitude. We saw a little bit of his film on his update, and that's Walter Youngbear, who I think will play guard, but with losing Altuner, could he maybe battle at center and maybe try and get involved in that competition there? We'll see what happens, but I think he's going to be on that interior for WVU, and he'll find a spot probably in the rotation. Walter Youngbear, the offensive lineman from Tulsa, is a transfer coming in. And then the Mountaineers really did a good job, I think, in the recruiting class, targeting some areas of need that I think they needed, and that's the trenches on both sides of the football and the defensive backfield. So we got multiple signings to talk about here that will join that offensive line as well, coming in as freshmen. Gavin Crawford coming in from Maryland there. That pipeline West Virginia has, the Good Counsel High School going right now. Unfortunately, we lost Kyle Altuner, but you do have Gavin Crawford still coming in. Brandon Homedy coming in as well. He's from Ohio, 6'4", 298 offensive lineman. And the one that I think has the best chance to potentially play early, especially when you see how thin things are and how you may need someone, the guy that prototypically is there size-wise is absolutely a stud. I mean, look at this, 17, 18 years old. I guess he'll be 18 at least probably when he comes in. Aiden Buchanan, 6'8", 320 out of Maryland. And I think, some of the recruiting staff that talked about him some on signing day said that he's probably actually 6'9" now already. So this guy is absolutely huge. So you don't see many guys come in and play on the offensive line at true freshman. When you have that type of size, if you can adjust to the speed of the game and get the system down quick enough, maybe you could, if you're strong enough with that type of size, you would think that there's a chance. So maybe the offensive lineman I'm most excited about there, Aiden Buchanan, as far as an incoming. But we still also have Jameer Davis, a good-sized guy as well, 6'6", 305 out of Ohio, that will join as far as guys that are coming in on that offensive line. So there's the offensive roster update I wanted to touch on with you guys. I'm going to take a swig of my water, and I'll catch up in the chat with you guys before we talk a little bit about the defensive update at this point. Good morning, Sam. Appreciate you hopping in here, man. Appreciate everybody hopping in here early this morning. I know some people probably watch this on a playback, but like I said, wanted to get this done before I head off to work here in a bit, and I won't be with you guys, keep you guys too long because of that, but appreciate you guys that are in here live. If you're in here live, just be sure to hit that thumbs up button. Just hit the X on the live chat. Scroll over, hit that thumbs up button, helps us a ton. If you're watching on a playback, you can still do that and help us out. And be sure to subscribe here where we'll cover this roster and transfer portal updates moving forward throughout the offseason. And if you really want to help us out and support us monthly, we'd appreciate that as well. That helps keep this mic recorded and that camera rolling here on the channel, and you get bonus WVU football content for doing that. And we really appreciate our channel members here as well. But like I said, the fast, easy, and free way, like and subscribe. Better be good news. Okay, James, I think that obviously the departure, not the best news, but I do think I have some potential good news maybe when we talk about some of the transfer targets, and fingers crossed there's a chance we may get some good news on the West Virginia coaching staff today, at least, James. And if so, I'll be back to talk more about that good news later tonight, probably after, post 10 p.m. with another live stream. So you guys may see me yet again later today. We'll see what happens. Christopher West, I kind of feel the same because you guys have heard me in the past here that have followed the channel for a long time rave about him and how I thought he was the center of the future. I thought he, could even be like a Zach Frazier type of player for West Virginia. I really liked Kyle Altuner. So, yeah, it does hurt a little bit. It does, especially when we're thin on the offensive line. I'm not going to lie. But also, people that look at the other side of the coin have said he hasn't played a snap yet, which, yeah, good point to make, but you can't discount potential, I don't think, and it's a loss in that area for sure. And I wish him well moving forward. But you always got to mention in these transfer portal updates, just because someone goes in the portal doesn't mean they couldn't return. West Virginia could hire an offensive line coach. He could like that hire a lot, decide to come back. You never know what will happen with guys in the portal that are uncommitted. We'll see, but I agree with you a little bit there, Christopher, for sure. George Edwards says he thinks we'll be better off in the long run with Rod's talent evaluation instead of Brown's. See how he builds a team and with the guys that have been given chances and are hungry. Absolutely agree there. If there's anything that I think is 100% certain, it's that Rich Rod has shown throughout his career to be a much better identifier of talent, developer of talent, evaluator of talent, whatever you want to call it, than Neil Brown. You can see proof in the pudding of that throughout Rich Rod's career, whereas Neil Brown has kind of been the opposite. I even have a video on the channel talking about players regressing under him. You guys can find there. So I 100% agree with you, George, for sure. Linda Skidmore says Desnor, I think, goes to slot, could be a Tavon type. If we weren't so thin at running back, you could maybe look at that, but I think that he'll probably stay there with the minimal bodies that we have at the running back position. And we have several Tavon Austin slot type guys. If you want the Tavon Austin slot type guy, look no further than Dom Collins. I'm telling you guys, when you see him on the field, his speed is going to blow you away. He is extremely, extremely ridiculously fast for sure. For sure, guys. Good point here, Earth Ether. Appreciate that. There's almost 7,000 players total in the portal. Insane, ridiculous numbers. It's crazy time in college football, but there are players West Virginia is going to get, and they're going to bring in guys, and that's a great transition, Earth Ether, into talking about some of the transfer portal targets, which I do want to talk about. But first, we got to talk about the defensive side of the roster, guys. Let me get through that real quick, and then we will talk about some of those targets, because there are a ton of players in the portal, and Rich Rod knows how to find good players no matter where they come from. So don't be discouraged if there's not a lot of guys coming from Power Fives. I think there will be some of those guys coming along, but these guys, Rich Rod has shown to be able to find diamonds in the rough always. So just keep that in mind. But there are some big name targets we're after. One that I'm really excited about, we'll talk about towards the tail end here. But let's get to the roster update here really quickly. For the defensive side, just to talk about where things stand here before we get into, these roster updates coming hot and heavy in January once players start to enroll, be it transfers or the freshmen. But you can kind of see here and get a glimpse of what players you can see that will join this roster potentially, plus the others that will have commit from the portal. But on the defensive side, we have Torres Simmons looking to come back for his final season, a couple redshirt sophomores and Zach Keith and Orion Fisher, and then Mekhi Byerson will be a redshirt freshman there at that defensive end spot. Interior defensive lineman, Eddie V, who will be a redshirt senior, potentially come back for his final year. Same goes for Sonny Redwood. So I think you have a couple of experienced guys there, and then as well as Hammond Russell, who's experienced and seems to be sticking around. So I do like the seniority, there that you do still have on the D-line, it looks like, and a couple talented freshmen, or there were freshmen last year. There'll be sophomores in Elijah Kinsler and Nate Gabriel. And my wild card here is Corey McIntyre Jr. Before the knee injury last year, I think he was going to be a big-time player on this defensive line, so I think he will showcase that this upcoming season. So that's kind of what we have coming back on the D-line. Let's look here as far as signings that could help us there in the trenches on that side. Some freshmen that we have coming in. And some of our higher-rated recruits are actually here on the D-line, including Taylor Brown, who is arguably the highest-rated player in the class. 6'3", 250 guy out of Maryland. Really good potential. Like him a lot. We also have Wilnerson Telemock, who has excellent size at 6'6", 257 out of Florida. Amir Leonard Jean Charles will be an interior guy from Tennessee, 6'4", 305-pounder. And then we have another edge guy potential with Ramondo Johnson, 6'3", 250 out of Florida. And same goes for Brandon Caesar, who was highly rated, 6'4", 255-pounder out of Ohio. And glad to see Evan Powell get back into the fold. He decommitted when Neil Brown was first fired, was one of the first decommits, but decided to hop back on board here. So you get another defensive lineman coming in from Maryland that could potentially be an edge guy as far as the signings that you have coming in. We don't have anyone that is committed as a transfer on the defensive line, but we do have plenty of guys we're targeting. Talk more about that momentarily, as I said, after we get through the roster update on this side. But let's continue with that so we can get that done and talk about those targets before we get set to wrap this one up before too much longer. linebackers. This is where we are a little bit thin, kind of similar to receiver and offensive line. On the offensive side, you lose Josiah Trotter, perhaps the most impactful loss you've had in the portal. You lose Trey Lathan, but it looks like you'll return Reed Carrico, which is big. I really liked the way that he played coming over from Ohio State there in his first year. He'll be here for his final season. Same goes for Caden Beiser, a former walk-on that earned himself a scholarship. Ben Cutter will be a junior that's seen a lot of reps. And then you have a couple of guys that are going to be redshirt freshmen, Curtis Jones Jr., who got a couple of snaps in the bowl game, and then Ricky Williams as well. Then you have Zay Jennings, who we'll see where he fits in with the new staff. He obviously was a spear that the previous staff was really high on, played a lot on special teams, and filled in there in some reserve duty at that spear spot, but seems to have a high ceiling, according to the previous staff. Defensive back is going to be an area where West Virginia adds a lot of guys. They don't only have a lot of guys committed as signings, but they have a lot of guys that they're targeting in the portal as well. Jacoby Spells will return at the cornerback position. Then you have a bunch of young guys. Jordan Jackson will be a redshirt sophomore. His brother's already in the portal, Josiah Jackson. You have Keon Washington, Chris Henry, and Keyshawn Robinson, who will all be redshirt freshmen. Keon Washington was one that the previous staff was pretty high on, so maybe he plays there. And then safety, pretty much decimated there. No experience, next to no experience there. Aiden Nelson is a redshirt freshman. So is Jason Cross. And then Israel Boyce will be a sophomore, as he did get some experience. He's the only one that has a little bit of experience you have returning at the safety spot. You will need to add some special teamers potentially as well. Oliver Straw is the only one returning. Maybe you add a long snapper. You do have some walk-on kickers and like RJ Cocan that could contribute there. We'll see what happens. So that's the defense if players that return. Let's talk about the defensive players that could come in. Let's go signings first, and then we will talk a little bit about the transfer guys. We only have one defensive player to talk about that we have committed on the transfer side, but we do have a lot of guys we're targeting, so we'll talk about targets then. But as far as defensive players, we have linebacker Michael Hasty coming in from Georgia that'll join the roster at some point, 6'3", 230. As far as he'll be a freshman coming in, of course. And then we'll also have Chris Filippo. We'll see where he fits in. He was kind of recruited to be a spear under this previous staff. So we'll see if there's a position like that in the new scheme under whoever the defensive coordinator is that could come in. And then we also will have defensive backs Tyrell Russell out of Ohio, 5'11", 175. And then the most highly rated addition, in my opinion, from the recruiting class, probably my biggest commit that West Virginia was able to grab, and just a phenomenal job of them being able to grab Dwayne Galloway after it looked like they were out of the picture. He is super fast as well, probably the fastest player in this class. He'll bring great speed to the cornerback position. He's a guy that's a highly rated freshman that'll probably have a chance to play early with his good size, 6'1", 175, and the speed he possesses. Watch out for Dwayne Galloway there in the defensive backfield. And then you will also have Sammy Etienne out of Florida. Most likely, I think, will be a safety. We'll see if that holds true. And then another flip that you got that was previously committed to North Carolina at safety, and Julian Horton out of Maryland. So those are the defensive signings that we have there coming in as freshmen. And then transfer, we do have one that is highly regarded that has committed to the Mountaineers already, at least, and that is Jordy Scruggs out of South Alabama. Yes, don't shake your head at South Alabama, because a lot of schools were after him, Virginia Tech being one, the other one being Colorado, who he, kind of shook off a visit going to, and instead of committing, choosing to commit to WVU. So, score one for Rich Rod over Coach Prime on that one. But Jordy Scruggs will be coming in, and it's a welcomed addition. Probably will play that slot corner role for West Virginia, and West Virginia will continue to target defensive backs and bring in guys in the portal and other players as well. Let's talk about some of those guys they're targeting. We've talked about a lot of them previously. And we've talked about, a bunch of defensive backs. We've talked about some other guys and, at the linebacker position, receiver, safeties. You can find those on previous transfer portal updates. But some guys here that I don't think I've had a chance to mention on other updates. Another defensive lineman. We talked about what you need to add in guys there. They're after Sam Houston defensive lineman transfer Chris Murray, according to Skylar Callahan here in this article from WVU on SI. Obviously going after some defensive players is a big need for West Virginia. The defensive line, a big need. They sent out an offer here to Sam Houston State defensive lineman. Chris Murray, who had 11.5 TFLs, which was second in CUSA, and 5.5 sacks. So Rich Rod, familiar with him playing in CUSA, and he was also a CUSA first-team all-conference player, was previously at TCU. He had a lot of great offers you see coming out of high school, very highly regarded, a lot of Power 5 programs after him as well, and still some Power 5 programs going after him here in the portal, offers from Arizona, Kentucky, Mississippi State, North Texas, Temple, and Texas State. So there's a defensive line target to maybe keep an eye on. But how about a receiver target that's an FCS All-American, actually? West Virginia needs players at the receiver position. We've got a couple committed already, and we're still targeting guys. We talked previously about a guy from Yale West Virginia was after. They're also after Western Illinois transfer Matthew Henry, who was an All-American, an AP All-American, 63 catches, 1,000, nearly 200 yards, so 1,179 yards and 6 touchdowns. So that would be a great pickup, getting an FCS All-American to transfer up and help you out there at the receiver position. And then, of course, save the best for last year as far as transfer targets. I've talked about him in the past, but I always got to throw him in here until we start getting news on him. Hopefully he gets to come on a visit here soon in January, but that's Hoss Haney. West Virginia all over him here, as Mike Ostie reported on WVSportsNow.com. And guys, this is big because I talked about as I went over in the roster update, and you guys saw we need to bring in a transfer portal quarterback. And I think the best target on the board for us for the Rich Rod scheme, Hoss Haney, super fast guy. You go look on your college football 25 game. We're talking a 90-plus speed guy on there, can really run it. So I think he would be great in this Rich Rod system. And not only can he really run it, he was regarded as a good passer as well coming out of high school, a top 15 quarterback in the entire country. So, highly regarded quarterback that can really have a lot of speed is Hoss Haney. Good here. West Virginia has him as a potential really high target here. Other programs that have contacted him, as I mentioned before, BYU, JMU, UCF, Utah, and Utah State. But it's believed that early January he's going to set up a visit to West Virginia. But he is really high on West Virginia, and West Virginia is really high on him. Actually, they're ranked the number 12 quarterback among 2024 prospects, according to 247, and has that great speed. Has been used a lot as a runner sometimes by TCU. They've brought him in. Hasn't really thrown a pass yet in college, but like I said, he does have a good arm. But if you want to see some of the speed, I'm just going to pull up one of his highlights here that you can find on Twitter from his high school days. Just take a look here. This is a little bit of Hoss Haney's, just a little glimpse of his from his high school days. And this is a 5A state championship game. So there you see just a little bit of a glimpse of the speed of Hoss Haney there in the 5A state championship game in high school. And it would be a huge pickup for this Rich Rod offense to have that quick burst that, goes 0 to 60 super fast, right, if you want to call it that. But Hoss Haney is one that I'm really high on my list of West Virginia transfers that I'm hoping to land. He's up there. Cam Vaughn at receivers up there. So keep an eye on guys like that, and we'll see what happens. News comes out on these transfers. We'll continue to report on it here on the CRW. But that's pretty much all I had for you. Wanted to touch on a little bit on the roster, and of course had to do the transfer update involving Kyle Altuner. Take one more swig of my coffee, and I'll see if you guys got any other comments. Other than that, we'll get ready to wrap up this December 27th transfer portal update. Expect some news to come out today, hopefully for WVU. If it does, we'll be back later tonight with another live stream post 10 p.m. here on the CRW. As George Edwards asked, any news on Cam Vaughn? I don't have any news on him. Zay Bradshaw is in the portal still. I did see that as well. I'm wondering if he may go to Marshall, though, following his dad's footsteps. You never know. But Cam Vaughn, I think we do have a really good shot at. He's got some other visits planned, but West Virginia is definitely in the mix there. He's been to campus on an official visit. That's what I can tell you. And he did have a, really positive experience from his official visit. There's a couple of guys from Jack State that came here that I think West Virginia has a good shot at. Him being one at the receiver position, and Fred Davis at the defensive back being another one, then he is super highly sought after, a really talented player that I'd love to see us add there. So, transfer portal targets, as far as guys I'm really high on my list, add Fred Davis in there with Cam Vaughn and Hoss Haney, who I just showed you guys, who has great speed. But that's all I've got, guys. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Appreciate everybody that hopped in here live. Like I said, know a lot of people will watch this on a playback with me doing it early in the morning, but I got to wrap this one up. Got to head to work here in a bit. If any news does come out today on the coaching search or any other transfer portal news, I'll be back to talk about it later tonight, another live stream. So you may see me again later tonight, guys, and I'll have a chance to chat with you guys again there. So if you didn't get a chance to watch this one live, maybe you'll get to come in that one and chat a little bit in the chat with me there. But I appreciate you guys that did do that in this stream. Before you head out, hit that thumbs up button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. plenty of news will be coming throughout this offseason, whether it's the staff building or the roster building, and we'll be covering it all here on the Country Roads webcast. So keep it locked here with us by hitting that subscribe button. Can never thank you guys enough for doing that and helping us get over 2K so quick here throughout this coaching search and throughout the building of this 2025 roster. And we'll continue to give you guys updates on all that there to give back to you guys for your support. And of course, we'll always give you the bonus content there for your membership support as well. But thank you guys so much for being here this morning. Hopefully we get some more positive news later today, and I'll be back to chat with you guys later tonight. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz. And until next time, let's go Mountaineers.